Hey there, it's Olivia Spanner here from Olivia's Catastrophe, and today I'm here to give you a recent reads video where I talk about 10 books that I have recently read, and I'll have content warnings in the description box down below in case that is something you need. But without further ado, let's get right down to the 10 books I have recently read. The very first book I have here to talk to you about is one I have mixed feelings on, and that is Penance by Eliza Clark. Now, I think this book is incredibly clever. This is written in the form of mixed media, interviews, podcasts, and diary entries of this crime that has been committed where 3 students end up torturing and murdering another student. And it's written in the tone of a man trying to explore this true crime and reciting it to you. But at its essence, this is a fictional book. It is not non-fiction. This crime does not exist. It has not actually happened. And actually, this is entirely a satire that is commentary on the true crime genre and the nature of being interested in true crime stories. I think I should preface this by saying that I am not a fan of true crime. That is one of the few genres I completely and entirely don't read. I don't like true crime. So reading this, I was not a big fan of the true crime nature of it, of course. Like, even though it's being smart and being satirical, I still was pretty much reading a fictional true crime book, and so my enjoyment was only ever going to go so far. I do think it was also incredibly layered and incredibly clever, because I just love the way that this book, in the narrative that it's written and the perspective the author has chosen, is talking about how we do profit from these crimes. This is a white, straight man telling this story that is full of female rage, that is full of bullying, that is full of the growing pains of being a woman who is coming into their own as a teenager. It's full of like a lot of pain and emotion and hurt, and you never get to hear firsthand from any of the girls who experience any of those things. You only get to see it from the perspective of this white man who is profiting off of their story and their experience. And that duality, that choice of narrative, is just such an intelligent one to choose from. I love stories that just by their framework are doing something smart. And I do think this framework of telling us and exploring how sensationalizing, how true crime sensationalize things, how these podcasts are really harmful, and how sometimes they are embedded and full of sexism and unfeeling and lack of sympathy. The way that this book, by being a fictional true crime book, managed to explore the true crime genre while without profiting off of or using an actual crime itself. Again, incredibly clever, incredibly intelligent. Eliza Clark knew what she was doing. That said, my reading experience wasn't the best. I did think that this was quite long for what it was. We go into each of the accused teenagers' perspectives, and I felt like it got a bit repetitive in places. I felt like I had enough of hearing about the horrible ways in which these girls manipulated each other and bullied each other in school. Like, at some points it became just a bit too much of the same old, and that detracted from my enjoyment of the reading experience. Then I read a book that I didn't like at all, and that is Dal A for Aunties by Sutanto. I really wanted to enjoy this because I've been reading a lot of dark books, and I wanted something humorous and funny to kind of break up some of the heavy, dark, gothic reads I was reading. This did not serve me well. This one is about our main character. She is Indo-Chinese, and she is part of this family that are cursed, where all the men leave. She then joins her family business and becomes a wedding photographer, and they get commissioned to do a wedding for these celebrities. So everything has to go off without a hitch. But her aunties set her up with a date with the owner of the hotel the night before the wedding, and in the process of that date she accidentally kills the hotel owner. And they try and hide the body and kind of hide the fact that they murdered someone who's very instrumental to this wedding, and it's supposed to be full of shenanigans and everything. I just was not finding it very funny. I didn't connect with the humour and the comedy in this. It felt very, very gimmicky, and it lent on gimmicks and stereotypes the whole way through. There's an auntie who does Tai Chi when she's stressed. That's pretty much all she does, and that's supposed to be funny again and again and again. The way they have to go through this book is you have to suspend your disbelief, because nobody would get away with the things that they get away with in this book. You kind of know that going in, and so I was suspending my disbelief until the point where I just literally could not suspend it anymore. It was impossible to. Too many outrageous things upon outrageous things had happened that I couldn't even process it in my mind anymore, and I just found like a lot of the jokes just didn't land. They were just leaning so hard on Asian stereotypes that they didn't land. In the first 50 pages I also struggled really to get into it, because a lot of this is told to you. It's really written for people who are not Indo-Chinese. Like, they would say something and a auntie might switch between using Indonesian and Mandarin and English, and then she would explain why the auntie did that, rather than let the auntie do that and let us pick up the pieces and understand how multicultural they really are. The author had to tell us. Anytime that they did something that was cultural, the author had to tell us and explain why they did it the way they did it. And I have brain cells, I can read, I can research, I don't have to be told everything. I think that our main character was annoying. She lacked autonomy, she was just going with the flow, and then she got really mad at everybody because of the fact that she lacked autonomy. And I was like, sis, if you ever made a choice in your life, choose not to be angry at people who are just taking you on your word and trusting what you say. You lied to everybody. That's nobody else's fault but your own. So that really bothered me. The love interest in this has no personality traits. Like, what can we say about Nathan other than the fact that he's in love with her? Nothing. He doesn't communicate with her at all. He's a bit of a wet towel love interest as well. The butt end of a lot of these jokes is that men are trash, and while that sentiment can be funny for a moment or two, I do think I just want to see better male representation, especially better like diverse male representation. I think it's important. I think it's good for us to show healthy depictions of men. Like, of course, toxic masculinity is a thing and it's annoying and we can all laugh about it, but if that's the joke around men constantly all the time, that they're so silly, that they're so ridiculous, it really creates us versus their mentality, and this book kind of just harbors that us versus their mentality the whole time, rather than like coalition for feminism or for what we want masculinity to look like and change into. The epilogue was just a rush to the end. It was just bad through and through. I had another miss. I read Mortal Follies by Alexis Hall. I generally love Alexis Hall books, so every time I read one that I don't like, it hurts my soul, and this literally made me want to cry. I went to Bath recently, and this is set in Bath, so I thought it was the perfect time to pick this up, and case in point, it was, because a lot of the places that I went and visited and knew more information about by going to were featured in this book, so that was a lot of fun for me. And this one is a historical fantasy romance that's queer. So it's set in Bridgerton era time in the UK, and we are following a narrator who is a puck-like fairy who is telling this story, and it's about Malis, who is this young debutante who is going on the scene for the first time, trying to get married, and she is cursed. And this curse is really interfering with her social life. So what she needs is a woman who is exiled for being a witch to help her kind of remove this curse from herself. And to be honest, that storyline isn't half bad. Actually, reading the plot was pretty good and I had a great time with it. I really liked Malis as a main character. She's a bit floppy, but she's still good. Like, she's still lovely to follow, even though she is not very vivacious or daring or the typical protagonist that you might like to follow. She's still nice enough to read about. I then struggled with the love interest, who is the exiled witch. She was horrible to our love interest. She was incredibly horrible to our love interest. She was always holding herself back and never fully explained her reasons for doing so. And she just was mean, like mean in very pointed, very manipulative ways that I didn't think she needed to be. Her friend was lovely, even though a bit airheaded and not as much of a significant character as possible, and the mystery of the curse managed to get solved, and they did things and everything wrapped up at about the 200-page mark. But this book is 400 pages long, so you would think that that plot that I described to you was wrapped up halfway through. Then the book should finish, it should end, it's done what it needed to do. No, instead what the author chose to do was drag this book out for another 200 pages, and because we finished up with the curse, we finished up with the main plot line, what Alexis Hall did was just threw in another curse, which they needed to solve in almost exactly the same way that they solved the first one. And we went through all of the motions again, and to be honest, it could have almost been copy-paste the same story because of how repetitive it got. And I'm sorry, that second half dragging and being the same thing again rather than finishing the story really bothered me and irritated me and bored me to no end. which also made me dislike the love interest more because we had more time with her for me to see how much more horrible she was. I would never have risked it all for her the way that Malice, our main character, does. I also got a bit tired of the humour of the puck-like fairy who's narrating this. At some points it's a little bit funny, it's a little bit silly, but then at some points it gets too much and I'm just like, that's not actually a joke. Not because it's anything serious, but just because it wasn't humorous. It didn't make me giggle. And so this dragged and I got really annoyed and I didn't ship the romance. I know there's a sequel. I will not be reading the sequel. But don't worry, I then read a string of very good books. So the next thing I read was Safiyyah's War by Hiba Noor, and this is a middle grade historical fiction book. And I gave this book 5 stars. I absolutely loved it and became a new favourite. I haven't had a 5 stars middle grade read for a little bit of time, so that made me incredibly happy. And this was very, very unexpected because I don't tend to read that much historical fiction anymore. So this one is set during World War II and we're following a little Muslim girl who is just helping her parents out around the house and around the mosque, and she discovers that her dad is sneaking out late at night, and the reason that he is doing that is because he is working with the imam at the mosque to ferry Jews along their way and send them into safety. But when her dad comes under suspicion for his activities, she kind of ends up chipping in to help. And I really love this for many reasons. I think it's very approachable for its middle grade audience. When you're dealing with topics such as war, it can be really difficult to show the danger, the uncertainty and the violence and let the child understand all of that, while also not making it too graphic, while also not making it too scary. And I think this book managed that balance very well. It's serious and it shows the seriousness of the situation, but it's also not going to petrify any child readers. So I appreciate that the author managed that balance so very well. This is also based on the true story of a particular mosque in France where an imam worked with various other people to actually hide Jews and to get them to safety. I did not know anything about that. So reading this book and then reading the author's note was really insightful to me as an adult reader, and I think it'd be insightful to lots of other adults. Now this is a historical fiction, but the author does a lot to talk about how the discrimination that people were facing, the racism, the xenophobia, the sexism that was going unchecked before World War II started. It shows that heating up in France and how that leads and leaves room for fascism and Nazism to flourish. And so even though this is a historical book, I think it's a very good one for children to read, to be able to see what behaviours are unacceptable and to see what behaviours are toxic and need to be stopped before they get too far. And so I appreciated that even though this is a historical fiction, the author so clearly navigated making it applicable to everyday society, and we need it all the more in this present day. At the same time, it's not all doom and gloom. She does manage to respectfully of the war scenario and the ongoing conflict in the book weave in some moments of like beauty and also like discreet happiness, and she captures what it's like to be a child who doesn't entirely know what's going on, who sometimes feels belittled by their parents very well. This was just a very superbly well done book that is an enjoyable read at the same time, but an emotional read too. Knocked it out of the park. I also read She Drives Me Crazy by Quindlen, and this was another 5 stars, new favourite for me as a young adult contemporary queer romance. So this one is about our main character Scotty. She is a basketball player in her school and she had a relationship with someone before, but that person moved away and dumped her in the process, even though they still could have been dating. And she ends up, because of a car crash, needing to drive Irene, who is a cheerleader, to and from school. And as she does so, she starts to discover that there's a lot more to Irene than just being the cute, popular cheerleader who is her enemy. Instead, there's a lot more to Irene that she assumed, that she has to discover, and she actually ends up fake dating Irene to try and make her ex jealous. And I thought this was an absolutely fantastic story. I really loved it. I went into this because I used to play basketball and I wanted to see some basketball romance books, but it doesn't actually go that hard on the basketball front. I'm not going to say there's no basketball in it, but if you go into it because you want to read about basketball, it's not the book for you. But if you want something that is about teenagers and toxic relationships, you really should. This book is so important to teenagers because it helps them identify what a toxic relationship is, what your reactions and your behavior to that toxic relationship, whether you're doing something toxic as a spin-off, or whether, how do you move on? Like, how do you move forwards? How do you heal after a toxic relationship? Should you be going into another relationship or not? And I think this book does such a good job of really focusing on a toxic relationship as actually that's the core relationship in this one, but not in a way where the character's going down that spiral, but in a way where the character is trying their hardest to move on from that spiral, and mostly doing it all wrong, but learning in the process. And I appreciated that this was largely a story of healing and emotional processing in a way that felt very mature. I could see why the characters were making the choices that they were as teenagers, even though I was like, those are not the right choices to be making. But you also get to see a lot of healthy behaviors here, a lot of healthy communication in terms of not only our main character thinking about this person that they're starting to have feelings for, a new person that they're starting to have feelings for, but also in the family members and the family behavior and the friendships and the friends that they have around them. On top of that, this book also talks about coming out, what that is like, the pressures of school culture, the pressures of being an athlete in school culture, and what it means when your parents don't actually support what you do, or think it's frivolous, or thinks it's silly, even though that's something you absolutely love doing. I appreciated that this book breathed into and gave life and gave time to each and every single one of those subjects. It was very balanced, and throughout all of it, it still managed to give me as well an enemies to lovers romance. I appreciated that it managed to give me that romance while also dealing with a toxic relationship on the other hand, and how you move past that. Incredibly well balanced for not too long a book. This book was exactly as long as it needed to be. By the end, I was internally like touched by the emotional journey that we'd seen these characters go on, and I felt like crying a little bit inside my body, even though I'm not a crier out on the outside. Really fantastic. Oh, I read a book I really did not like as well. I really had a not so great reading spree in these 10 books. So I read Here Lies a Vengeful by Codie Crowley. This is about a girl who is murdered, and she wakes up undead because she was murdered on a specific part of sacred ground, and she goes to find her murderer and hunt that murderer down and solve her own murder mystery. That is what this book promises. That is what the synopsis says. That is not what you're going to get at all. So I thought this was about a girl who's going to solve her own murder, so it'd have horror, murder, mystery elements to it. Nope, no way. What you get actually is a girl who is pretending to be alive until she jogs her memory enough to remember who murdered her. There's no solving, there's no sleuthing, there's no detective work, none of it, nowhere. It's just her gradually remembering who murdered her, which is boring if you think about it. But then there's the supernatural elements, and they come in as well because she is undead. Do we understand what being undead means? No. Do we get an explanation of the scope of what you can and can't do as someone who's undead? No, except when the plot is convenient, then suddenly she has a new power that she can use because she's undead. It's all plot convenience, there's no rules in place, and so you can just pull things out of thin air whenever the plot demands them. So you'd think that loads of people who have seen her throughout the day would know who the last person is that they left her with, and they actually do. Everybody knows, but they won't tell her for some reason. They just don't want to talk to her. They don't want to tell her a straight answer. Everybody's talking in riddles or codes, and there's no good reason why they are. So it frustrated me to no end that this book could have been 10 pages long if she'd gone back to the town and one person had said, oh yeah, last I saw you with was this person in this very dangerous situation, and that might have led to her murderer way sooner. I also didn't like that this character is in this town and everybody hates her. Do we know for why everybody hates her? No, that's never explained. She actually seems like a decent person, so I don't understand why everybody hates her. And then there's also this love interest, who is also undead by the way, and she treats him abominably. She believes that he is an axe murderer who has killed multiple girls. We're also told, by the way, that you are only made undead if you've been killed in an unjust way. So I really find it bizarre that she believes that this love interest has done such terrible things to different people, because then what would be the injustice of a murderer being murdered? There wouldn't be an injustice there. Theoretically, in this fictional world, there would be no injustice for him to be brought back to life with. But she believes this of him, doesn't ask him about it, and treats him terribly throughout the whole way through, because she believes this without asking him about it or asking anybody else if it's true or not. She's just assuming. She treats him terribly the whole time through. but whenever she asks him to do anything for her mystery, he does it at the drop of a hat, even though it's a massive inconvenience to him, and I don't understand that. That just makes him a manic pixie dream boy. This book was wrong and bad in so many different ways. So much of it frustrated me, so much of it didn't make sense, and that's a no-go from me. I also read The Hunter's Gambit by Ciel, Perlot, and this is a vampire novel. It's about someone who hates vampires, who is kidnapped by vampires, and they make her their vampire queen. She's the vampire queen for 3 days, and then she'll be eaten, and her blood will be drunk for a ritual which will keep the vampire building and citadel safe. That's the way the magic works, and she does not want to be vampire food, so she is trying her best to escape this citadel full of vampires. And I had a lot of fun with this book. I don't think it's perfect, but I whizzed through it very, very quickly, and I was eating it up because it was just really fun, seductive, polyamorous vampire vibes. What I liked about it is that our main character is not a vampire, and I really agreed with all of her escape attempts. I saw why she was doing them. She was very persistent about it. She was clever, she was daring, and she was trying everything in her arsenal, which is exactly what I would do if I was kidnapped by vampires. So I appreciated that this girl was fighting for her life in a very realistic way. It was really fun, the first half of this book, just to see her kind of navigate this new vampire world, understand what it's like, see who has betrayed her, and try her best to escape. It's a pretty straightforward plot up until that point, and I was having a very good time with it. I do think I struggled a bit more with the latter half of it, because then she starts to form some deals and kind of some strategies that involve vampires, and time again, from her perspective, the vampires would betray her, and she would just fall for it every single time and then feel outraged that she was betrayed and then trust them again or make a new deal. And I was just like, girl, you can see this pattern isn't working for you, so why do you keep coming back to the same people? And that confused me quite a lot. The further in we got, the more she survived things that I don't think she really should have been able to survive. So you've got to suspend your disbelief a little bit, but that was fine with me. And then also towards the end, it kind of throws in this polyamorous romance, and while I can see the lustful seduction that would happen when your life is in danger and you think you're going to die, I can believe that, I can validate that, but the fact that it went to the level it did in a romantic sense, I was like, now is not the time, and I just wouldn't trust these vampires to be romantic with me in a relationship way, given the situation that I'm in. So I found it hard to believe the romance, even though it was quite easy to believe the steamy elements physically and why they were happening. So I felt a bit mixed on the love front, and also towards the end she ends up fainting quite a lot in the middle of action scenes or passing out, which is valid for the ways in which people are drinking her blood, so she's gonna faint, and also like she is getting injured, so of course you'll pass out if you bash your head in and stuff. So it makes sense in some ways and forms, but also in others it just meant that the action scenes or the scenes where lots was happening would be cut short, and then later on they'd be told to us like what happened in those moments. So yeah, and the ending was very, very rushed, and it kind of just happened. I think it could have slowed down and built something a bit more believable for the ending. So this one ended up being a mixed read for me, because I did have a lot of fun with it and it was good, especially the first half, but the second half didn't quite win me over as much as the start did, and yet I still whizzed through it and finished it very quickly, so that's saying that. I also read The Mark by Frida Isberg. This is a proof copy and this is what the finished copy is, and this is a dystopian adult novel. It's set in Iceland, which makes this really unique. It's by an Icelandic author, and it's about positive discrimination in this dystopian world. So in this world, citizens can take an empathy test, and if you pass this empathy test you are marked as safe. There's some areas emerging where only safe citizens can go, or only safe citizens can buy X thing, or only safe citizens can go to this school, and it's about this test as it's being rolled out. So it's being rolled out in schools, and there's a political law that could or couldn't be passed, and if this political law is passed it means that everybody will need to take an empathy test. And so the referendum on this is going on while you also follow 4 different points of view. Each of these characters have different journeys with whether or not they are marked, but also different opinions about whether or not marking situation with the test should be rolled out. Now, I really like this. I think this is the dystopian I've enjoyed the most in recent years. I think the Icelandic setting added something different and new to it, because I just haven't read a book set in Iceland before, so it was nice to be in that landscape and in that place. I also really like that this book didn't ignore the fact that similar situations to this, discrimination between black people, has happened, and also like it reminded me a lot of the David Star that Jewish people had to wear leading up to the Holocaust. I like that there was a brief moment where it mentioned this is not the first time that this has ever happened in our world or society. And at the beginning I felt very confused between the 4 points of view. It was a lot to take in at first and I struggled to differentiate between them, but the further in I read, the more that I understood the distinguished narratives and storylines, and the more that I liked that we had 4 points of view. I wouldn't change it for the world, because we got 4 very distinct different opinions and 4 different experiences with the empathy test, and you got to see how being marked helped some people and people thrived in that situation, but also how it cut a lot of people off. And it made me really sympathize with everyone and everyone's point of view of like, this is a good thing or this is a bad thing. And overall, I personally think it's a bad thing, but I could see the argument, I could see why some people would want it. The ending was very, very chilling. It's that kind of ending that doesn't answer everything, but is left just open enough that you've got enough answers. Things are closed for the most part, but it's just open enough for you to feel like, ooh, that shiver, that what if this is real? What would that mean for me? What would it mean for the people around me? And I really liked how it ended. I don't actually have too much to say about this one, but I read it very quickly. It was compelling, the characterization was good, the concept was good. It's a concept read, it's a concept novel, and as a sci-fi reader and fan, I liked what this did with the concept. I read a picture book, and that picture book is Tyrone's Cool Crowd by Lenny Henry. Now last year I believe I read the first book in this picture book series. They can be read as standalones, but they are also like following Tyrone and his granddad. And in this one, Tyrone has to get used to change because he is due for a haircut. Fantastic afro there, but it's time for it to be cut, and he is not looking forward to having his hair cut. So it's about embracing change, and it's one that you can read with children. Salomey Doku is the illustrator again, and I love her artwork. I think it's fantastic. I love the colors, A+, they're bright, they're bubbly, wonderful. I think one of my complaints in the previous one for this was that there was rhyme in it, and I didn't always think that the rhyme was done well. And in this one, they've taken most of the rhyme out. It's mostly written in prose, but every now and again there's a rhyming line here or there. And personally, I wish it had chosen a lane and stuck with it. I wish it had not included any rhyme whatsoever, because I was going through the flow of reading it and then I would trip over a rhyme and I'd be like, what? So that was a bit odd. But the message really like of, you know, you'll look good with any haircut, embrace the change, try something new, it will grow back again. I really liked all of that. I think it's an important message for early young children to learn about the fact that they can do anything. If you know the first book, you know, they can do anything, and that like change is a good thing sometimes and it's worth embracing. And it was nice to see his granddad be there for him, support him through that. It was just a really, really lovely picture book. And also all of these black characters, all these different hairstyles being visible on the page, it was really lovely and heartwarming. So that's a picture book I really, really recommend. What White People Can Do Next by Emma Dabiri, and the subtitle for this is From Allyship to Coalition, and I gave this 5 stars. It became a new favourite and I think it's absolutely fantastic. It's a short non-fiction and it's all about the topic of race, and if I just had to recommend one anti-racism book to you, it would be this one. This is my #1 top read for people who are trying to be better allies. I almost didn't read this because it's called What White People Do Next, and I am, case in point, not a white person, but I learned from this book and I really appreciated this book. It's short, you can get through it, it's very accessible, and it made me reframe my concept of race, but also my concept of coalition. Even though we know about intersectionality, it goes deeper into that topic and breaks down the importance and the relevancy of coalition, but also how black people are not the only people who are victims of racism. It's not just people of color who are victims of racism, but to be white, to be Caucasian is a race too, and therefore you watching this are also a victim of racism. And this book explains why that is, how that is, and why coalition benefits all of us. It's the most direct and clear-cut book I've ever read that really broke down the racial discussion and debate and ongoing struggle in a way that just felt very succinct, very well worded, and just so easy for me to think on, but also just to think about in a sense of how do I apply this to my real life? How can I do steps to be better? How can I do steps to contribute to making this world a better place? This book managed to pull that off. And I hesitate to say much more than that because it's one I really urge, please, 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 all of you to go out and read, because it is that important, it is that relevant. And there you have it. Those are 10 books that I've recently read. Please let me know in the comment section down below what's a book that you recently finished. Have you read any of these? Do any of these catch your eye? Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Hit that subscribe button if you want to see more, and don't forget to hit that notification bell to be updated every time I have a new video. And you know what they say, onwards and upwards. Excelsior!